like left of the elevator.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
That's exactly what we're hoping for.
We've got a pretty full day, so I want to see if we can get started right on time and give full time to all of our speakers and all of the discussions that we've got planned for today. So welcome, everybody. My name is Paul Kovacs. On behalf of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, I welcome you here to our second symposium on basement flood reduction. So delighted that everybody's here. Great turnout again, as last time. I've got a couple introductory remarks. I want to start by thanking Canadian Underwriter and the Insurance Media Group for their support, and Mainline Backwater Valves for their support for this event. Support like that is really essential for helping put the event together and getting the word out about what we're doing, so our thanks. An event like this takes a lot of work, so thanks to Dan Sandink, Glenn McGilvery, Tracy Waddington, and many others who are behind the scenes working to pull this together. Big thank you for all the speakers who've made time to be here today and talk, and thanks to all of you for coming. I've got a couple introductory remarks just to sort of set the stage for our discussion. I'll try to keep them short because you've got a lot of really outstanding speakers that you're going to have a chance to hear from in a moment. Dan Sandink and I put out a paper recently on the water damage that happened with the flooding in southern Alberta. One of the findings that we shared in that paper is that basement flood damage across Canada over the last 10 years adds up to something like $20 billion. So part of the reason why we're talking together, wouldn't it be great if we had the $20 billion and could do other things rather than cleaning up after the disasters that have been occurring? If you go back in time not too long, 30 or 40 years, basement flood damage was so unusual that we really didn't keep track of it. So we've come from a very low base not that long ago to $20 billion a decade now. And the data for 2013 looks like it'll be the worst year ever, with very large losses in southern Alberta, southern Ontario, and many other communities across the country experiencing basement flooding in 2013. So this is a problem that's been growing rapidly for some time now, and it's great that we're coming together to talk. One of the core messages from our institute, these losses are preventable. We're not going to stop the heavy rain. We're probably going to actually see more heavy rain in the future. But heavy rain did not lead to large losses in the past, and it's possible to manage this heavy rain that we will see perhaps increasingly in the future and not have such large losses. And some of the actions required lot level changes by individual property owners. Some of them require changes in public infrastructure, and we're going to spend today talking about what some of those broad ranges of actions can be. There's not a single answer to how you confront and tackle the issue of basement flooding, but there is a lot that can be done. $20 billion is a huge loss. I was trying to put that in context, and the data aren't very good, but over the last 10 years, the same period where we've come up with a $20 billion number, we have had the two most costly wildfires in Canada's history in Slave Lake and Kelowna. We've had the most costly hurricane with Hurricane Juan. We've had a number of flooding events, traditional riverine flooding events across the country. We had a tornado go through Goderich. We've had a lot of things in the last 10 years. When I was trying to add all of those things up, I didn't even come to $10 billion of damage in our country from things other than basement flooding over the last 10 years. So basement flooding has emerged as the dominant issue. There's a lot of people from the insurance industry here today. It's emerged as the largest cost for a lot of property insurance companies in Canada, now exceeding the cost of fire and theft and other perils that the insurance industry has been tackling for years. Now suddenly sewer backup and other aspects of basement flooding has come right up the agenda. So today's event is very timely. We've got some of the best and brightest here to talk about how you prevent the heavy rain that we are experiencing and will continue to experience, how we prevent that from causing loss and damage. There's many different dimensions to that. I'm quite proud of the role our institute has played to try to document that and share that information, host events like this to bring the best together and allow us to share some of that knowledge. We've got a report coming out later this year where we're going to showcase a number of communities that are showing leadership. We've got more than a dozen communities in the book that we'll have this year in terms of actions that are being taken to reduce basement flooding. And we're trying to get the message out that not only is there academic research about theory and possibilities of thinking something that could be done in the future, we're talking about communities that are doing things right now. The damage is happening now and communities are stepping up and responding. Insurance companies are also responding right now and changing their practices. So this is an issue today, and part of what we're trying to share with this symposium, share with our documentation, is some of the best things that we're seeing across this country, where people are really taking on the issue of basement flooding, trying to reduce the risk that the heavy rain causes the loss and damage that we've been experiencing. As I said, wouldn't it be amazing if that $20 billion didn't need to be spent doing repairs, if we could use $20 billion for the many other things we can think of. Again, to put things in context for today, I was flipping through some StatCan data, and published data from StatCan about the value of the sanitary sewer system in Canada in 1990. Our whole system was worth $14 billion. And in the year 2000, StatCan estimated that it was worth $14.5 billion. I haven't seen a newer number, but $20 billion relative to a lot of things like the value of our sanitary sewer system. It's a big number, and it's a big number that right now we're using to do repairs. But maybe we could find a way with today's event and others to move things forward. So with that was just some context for today's discussion. Thank you one and all for coming. Thank you in advance to all the speakers who are going to be participating and sharing their knowledge and expertise during the course of today. I'm looking forward to a great chance for me to learn. And I'm going to turn things over to Dan Sandink to take it from here. So welcome everybody, and thank you for coming.
Well, I'd also like to thank everybody for coming out today and all of our speakers. I know a few people had a little trouble finding hotels this week, so we really appreciate the effort in coming out to Toronto and busy downtown Toronto and participating in our event. I just wanted to provide a quick presentation to make sure everybody's on the same page. I know a few people were here a couple of years ago. We conducted a similar event in 2011. And I just wanted to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. There's different types of flooding, and we're mostly talking about urban flooding today. So we're going to hear from Charles Goulet from Winnipeg about the pretty incredible works in Winnipeg to prevent damage from river flooding. But a lot of the stuff we're talking about today relates to sort of heavy rainfall flooding in urban areas. So we've seen a number of very large loss events, as Paul mentioned. This is a big driver for claims for the insurance industry. Just recently in Mississauga, Brampton, and Toronto, probably the largest event, well, the largest event in Ontario and the largest single urban flood event in Canadian history, $850 million. So very significant. Last year was another big year. Environment Canada called it 2012 the year of the urban flood. So I think we might be coming up on another designation for this year as well. We had about $350 million in payouts in several events. The big one in Thunder Bay in Montreal. I think everybody might remember that one. And of course, a number of other events recently. Southern Ontario and Toronto in 2005 used to be the biggest one, and now we have the most recent event. Peterborough, which set off this as a big issue for a lot of people. Edmonton 2004, and many others. And as Paul mentioned, we're averaging about $2 billion a year in insured losses for these types of events. So a major driver for claims for the insurance industry. Aside from insurers, this is also a major issue for municipalities. Our friends at the Center for Neighborhood Technology conducted a survey of 48 Great Lakes municipalities last year, and they found that 100% of these municipalities have received complaints from homeowners or from residents about flooding. About 83% of the respondents said that the majority of the complaints were related to sewer backup, and then also quite a large number of complaints for seepage or infiltration flooding, as well as overland flow. So we're not alone in Ontario. Another thing that we've seen over the past few years is not just a sort of increase in frequency of claims, but the cost of claims. This is some information that Aviva Canada put out last year earlier this year, on the increase in the average water damage claim in Canada, and it's more than doubled in a lot of places over the past 10 years. The Canadian average in 2002 was about just over 7,000, and by 2012 it was almost 16,000, so a pretty significant increase. And one of the factors here that is driving these losses is increasing use of basements as living spaces. We just don't use it for storing our old clothes and things like that anymore. We're living down in our basements. We've got nice TVs and couches down there, so it's expensive when they flood. So a few of the major issues about urban flooding, we tend to sort of categorize the cause of flooding at sort of a homeowner level into three types. One type is overland flooding, and this is not something that's normally insured in Canada. So what's happening with overland flooding is rainfall is hitting the ground in urban areas at a rate that's too fast for infrastructure to carry it away safely. And then you have uncontrolled flows of overland water going into homes through windows, cracks in walls, and things like that. The next type is infiltration flooding, which is a pretty significant cause of flooding, a very frequent cause of flooding for homeowners. And this is related to water getting into the ground, in and around the foundation, seeping into the foundation through cracks and loose joints between the basement slab and the foundation wall. It could be related to groundwater tables, or even overland flow water percolating in down beside the foundation and getting into the home through cracks in the walls. And finally, sewer backup, which everybody here should be pretty familiar with, which is the causeway surcharging of the sanitary and separated sewer systems, or surcharging in combined sewer systems as well, essentially pushing sewage back up through home connections in the opposite direction it's supposed to go, and then into basement through floor drains and things like that. So one of the big issues with urban flooding in Canada is that we don't really have the same type of information for hazard analysis that we do for other types of flooding, specifically river flooding. In Canada, we have a pretty good tradition of mapping river flood areas that are prone to flooding from rivers. But in many cases, especially in older parts of municipalities, we don't really know when you have really, really heavy rainfall where the water is going to go. And this is an example from Peterborough, the 2004 storm in Peterborough. The green area outlined in black around the Otonabee River, that's the regional floodplain. And then all the red dots are surveys from an engineering firm that did a study after the flood showing where people actually complained about flooding, and it's all outside of the floodplain mostly. And it was related more to just really heavy rainfall flowing over the surface of the ground, not related to the river system. So it's hard to identify these areas in a lot of cases, and in older areas we may not have well-defined overland flow routes. So related to this issue, we hear a lot about combined versus separated sewer systems. And in Canada, it's been argued that we've gone through various eras of stormwater management. So we first started building cities back in the 1800s in Canada up until about the 1970s. We used to focus on getting stormwater off of urban surfaces as quickly as possible using underground pipes, pipe it down into the ground, get it off urban areas, get it down into the lake or the stream or whatever you can as quickly as possible. And usually we design these underground systems to handle anywhere from a 1 in 2 to 1 in 10 year design standard storm. Usually a 2 or 5 year standard is pretty common. So storms that you would expect maybe once every 2 to 5 years. And it was also common during this era to use combined systems. So these are systems that convey both stormwater and sanitary sewage. And depending on your system, you might have greater vulnerability or less vulnerability depending on your system and how it's set up and so on. The next era is been referred to as the stormwater management era. This lasted for about 20 years. These are really fuzzy boundaries in the timeline. It really depends on the developer and the municipality and so on. But in this era, we started to incorporate overland systems, major systems in the design of subdivisions so that when those underground pipes are full of water, water can be conveyed safely away from homes and buildings through streets, through swales and things like that. And usually we design these overland systems for a 100-year storm, and the underground systems, again, were designed from anywhere from a 2 to 10 year design standard. And now we're in what some people call the best management practice era. We're going to hear more about this from Credit Valley Conservation City Kitchener today. And now we're focusing on safely conveying stormwater away from urban surfaces, but we're also considering quality. So we're considering the environmental impacts of stormwater on surface water. We're using methods to treat this water before we release it into the environment. But essentially the design standards are same. Some are adopting heavier design standards, maybe 1 to 250-year design standards in some cases. But in general, we're using the same standards in Canada. So one of the issues with design standards, this again is an example from the city of Peterborough, is that we can exceed these design standards and get flooding. So this again is from the engineering study that came out after the after the 2004 storm in Peterborough. And they wanted to compare the rainfall of the July 2004 flood event to the design standards that were common at the time in the city. So a 5-year design standard in Peterborough, over a 1 hour period, you might expect about 36 millimeters of rain, which is a pretty heavy rainfall event, if you can imagine, over an inch of rain in an hour. And over a 24-hour period, you might get 63 millimeters. The 100-year standard, you might get 60 millimeters in an hour. Again, a lot of rain in an hour. A few inches of rain, it's pretty hard to imagine how much rain that would be. And over a 24-hour period, you might get about 110 millimeters. The July 2004 storm, in 1 hour, they had 80 millimeters of rain, which is almost as much as you would expect in 24 hours for a 100-year storm. And over a 24-hour period, they had over 260 mils. So it's hard to predict how your system's going to react to a storm like this. Another big issue in sewer systems causing sanitary sewer surcharge and basement flooding is what's referred to as floyd infiltration, which is essentially contribution of excess or unwanted water into sanitary sewer systems. There's a number of different factors that can lead to excess water getting into these systems. Some of the big ones are roof downspout connections and the sanitary foundation drain connections. So that's your perforated pipe underneath the ground around your basement footing, your foundation footing that directs stormwater away from your home. It used to be common practice in some areas to direct these directly into sanitary sewer systems. We don't really do that anymore. And there might be mistakes in construction where they're still connected. And then you could have things like just root infiltration from trees, cracking, loose joints, possible cross connections from storm catch basins in the sanitary. Various causes that are often hard to predict, and we don't often know about them until after we have a big flood. Another big factor we're going to hear about today, especially from our presenter from Welland, is the potential impact of climate change on extreme rainfall. So we're seeing many people anecdotally are reporting more frequent extreme rainfall events. And certainly the climate scientists are predicting more of these types of events in the future. We had a paper put out recently by Jim Bruce, formerly from Environment Canada, predicting that by 2050, what we used to see as 1 in 20-year events could be 1 in 10-year events in Southern Ontario. The report recently released by Toronto Environment Office, amongst various other predictions, one of them was as much as a 46% increase in the intensity of the maximum 1 hour precipitation event compared to today by 2050. So a very significant increase. And there was a study by Slobodan Simonovic and others at the University of Western Ontario in London, where they argued that by, or in the near future, your 2 hour rainfall events that we used to associate with 100-year events could occur once every 30 years. Climate change adaptation is a pretty big priority for municipalities in Canada. The folks involved with ICLR and MIT conducted a survey of municipalities globally last year or the year before on priorities related to climate change, and they had about 500 responses, including about 300 in the US and 26 Canadian responses. And of all the potential impacts of climate change, the top 2 that municipalities reported were increased stormwater runoff and changes in stormwater management design, and that ranked higher than electricity outages, drought, urban heat island impacts. So it's a pretty big thing on the radar for municipalities and climate change. So one of the big stakeholders who's represented today is insurers. As many of you know, we've been dealing with quite a few water damage claims, as we mentioned before. Pretty much now we're exceeding fire claims for water damage is the major source of claims for homeowners. There's sort of been two large areas that insurers have been using to sort of limit their exposure and incent risk reduction, financial measures like caps and addressing availability for very high-risk homeowners. But also, very promisingly, more and more insurers are becoming involved in incentivizing mitigation measures through things like educating their policyholders, educating brokers, and using incentives like caps, availability premiums, and so on to incentivize measures. And often what we see is incentivization of backwater valves in sump pumps. Of course, another big stakeholder is the homeowners, who are the most affected stakeholders. It's more than just cost and inconvenience for homeowners and residents. There's lots of irreplaceable items. We've done a number of surveys of homeowners who've been affected by basement flooding, and usually the big thing they talk about, it's not going through the insurance claim process and all that stuff. It's dealing with the sewage in their basement, losing photo albums, and things that can't be replaced, baby clothes, things like that. There's also potential damage to structure, so it's not just cosmetic things. There could be very serious damage to your home. There's potential long-term mold and potential health risks associated with basement flooding. People stress about potential property value loss. And one of the big groups that could really be affected by basement flooding are vulnerable basement apartment residents, possibly those who are in illegal basement apartments and don't have access to the normal supports that a lot of other people have. And you often hear from people affected by basement flooding, they can't sleep when it rains. So it's very stressful, and it's not just money. Understanding insurance coverage is another big issue that people deal with. What's covered, what's not covered. Usually sewer backup, that's the only thing that's covered, and often people claim they don't really know much about it until they experience an event and they're expecting coverage and they don't receive it. But another big factor for homeowners and residents is their considerable role in risk reduction. Through two large areas, they can reduce their contributions of water to sewer systems through things like disconnecting downspouts and foundation drains, as well as reducing the risk of water and sewage entering their home through a variety of methods that we'll hear about today. There's a number of additional key players, some of them represented today. The code community we've been working with over the past few years to incorporate more risk reduction measures in building codes. Provincial authorities involved in building code production, the National Research Council, local inspectors, chief building inspectors who have the responsibility for interpreting codes, which can have a big impact on what's actually applied, as well as builders. Progressive builders may choose to do more things. Contractors, plumbers, restoration specialists, many of you are here today as well, have a pretty important role because you're often looked to as the professionals, the experts by homeowners after flood events. They're looking to you for advice. And I just wanted to raise one last issue here. I had a whole presentation planned on this, but I cut it out to allow some more time for our lunch speaker today. But I just wanted to highlight the importance of code development. It's been one of the big areas that we've been working on the last few years. So one of the things that we found recently is that there's a lot of different interpretations of the part of the National Plumbing Code that relates to backwater valve installation in new homes. And this wording is adopted essentially throughout Canada. And what it says is where a building or drain may be subject to backflow, a backwater valve shall be installed. And last summer, we did a survey of local code officials across Canada. We had about 240 responses representing about 160 municipalities. And what we found is that it seems, especially out west in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, local officials just sort of by default interpret this part of the code to require backwater valves in new homes. They say if you're connected to an underground system, your home may be subject to backflow, so you have to have a backwater valve. Whereas in Ontario and other provinces, we tend to say, well, if you're going to build an infill development in an old neighborhood that has had a history of backflow, those are the homes that should have backwater valves. Greenfield development, et cetera, you don't need backflow valves, there's no history. And so we're trying to work on sort of standardizing the interpretation of this part of the code. We'd like to see them backwater valves installed more frequently. Of course, it's not just backwater valves, there's a variety of measures, and there's many other ways that we think the code could help. reduce risk through more specific requirements for block grading and backfill, requirements for some capacity and some pump backup systems. And I think Murray Pound is going to talk about this a bit at lunch as well. So just to go over some of today's topics, we're going to talk a lot about the causes and impacts of urban flood events. We're going to talk a lot about mitigating the risk, both lot level and municipal side, risk reduction measures, infrastructure and home measures. We're going to hear from Murray Pound, who's the president of Gold Seal Homes, at lunch, who's a pretty progressive builder and doing a lot of work in reducing water damage risk in new homes. We're going to hear about long-term issues related to risk reduction. We're going to hear from Credit Valley Conservation on their low-impact development program, and our friends from City Kitchener on their stormwater management financing and incentive program, as well as we're going to hear a bit about climate change from later on in the day. And then finally, we're going to end the day with a discussion panel. We're going to have about 5 minutes for a discussion or questions after each presentation. We'll have over an hour at the end of the day for questions and discussion with a number of key players in the area, many of our presenters, as well as a couple of other people, Chris Smith and David Kellershone from Region of Peel and City of Toronto. So hopefully we'll have some good discussion planned for later on today. And Paul mentioned we just put out a new report. There's a couple of reports I just wanted to draw your attention to. The report, the full report on the code survey is available on our website, just on our homepage. There's hard copies available outside. I'm not sure if we had enough for everybody. So if you didn't get a copy, you can go on our website, www.iclr.org, and download it. And Paul mentioned our most recent report, our response to the flooding in Alberta, which you can also find on our website. So feel free to download it and let us know if you have any questions. There's our website, in case you don't have it. Very simple. And with that, I'll say have fun, as much fun as you can have talking about basement flooding for a day. And with that, I'll pass it back to Greg.